Hi, I'm Marty Grohman, a former state representative and community volunteer. Good to be back on Bedford Public Access. You know, I really am interested in things that we can do that will open up our political process to more moderates, people who are just focused on getting the work done. I think it's become such an incredibly divisive time in our politics right now, and we need to find ways to get away from that. And that's why I'm really excited to bring you a talk today about open primaries. So I'm joined today by Kaitlin LaCasse from Open Primaries Maine. And we're just going to dig into that and really understand what it's about, what it means, and what some of the questions are, and why we think it's such a good idea. So Kaitlin, would you just open it up by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Marty, for having me here today. Happy to be here talking about opening Maine's primaries to unenrolled voters. So I'm with the organization Open Primaries Maine, and we are laser focused on opening Maine's primaries to unenrolled voters, which are commonly referred to as independents here, which you know well.
Like myself, yes.
And there's a specific legislation that's working its way through the process right now, LD 211, which is an act to open Maine's primaries to unenrolled voters. And so we are focusing on our efforts to advocating to help that pass. Representative Ken Ackley from Monmouth introduced the bill, and he has been able to put together a really tremendous group of co-sponsors, including Senator Justin Chenette, who is local to here, so I want to make sure that we thank him for his leadership on this issue. And so just a bit of background for folks. This legislation, similar legislation, has been percolating over the last 20 years, really, and 80% of Maine voters support opening Maine's primaries to unenrolled voters. So this isn't something that we just decided to do. It's the voters have been asking for it and have been saying that they want this. So now we're working on it.
Now, would Maine be the first state in the country to do this?
That's a great question, Marty. Actually, Maine is an outlier in that we're one of only 11 states that have closed primaries. So we tend to pride ourselves on voter participation and being at the forefront of election reform issues. And this is one place where we're actually behind other states.
So I'm an independent, so in the Democratic or the Republican primaries, which are typically held in June, leading up to the presidential or gubernatorial elections, which are, as everyone knows, in November. What does that mean for me as an independent? So today, now, as the law stands, if I wanted to go down as an independent, say I'm interested in contributing my voice to the Democratic primary, I'd like to see the Democratic Party advance somebody who's a moderate, a kind of get it done type. Today, I can't vote in that primary.
Correct. You would have to, in fact, enroll in the Democratic Party in order to vote in a primary. So this legislation makes it very easy. If you are an independent, unenrolled voter, you can walk in and you can choose either the Democrat or the Republican ballot. You can't vote in both. You have to choose one or the other. And it allows you to participate while maintaining that independent status.
And do you think what are going to be some of the benefits of that?
Well, I think increased voter participation is a tremendous benefit. You know, I firmly believe, and clearly Mainers do since they support this, that increased participation, the more people participate in our democracy, the better. And I think people having more voice and more choice is always a good thing.
So I think this will be good too, because those June elections, which is when the primaries are held, obviously, often there's a bond issue, but there's usually also the school budget vote, and those can be low turnout elections. So I think the knock on the structure we have now is that a relatively small number of voters end up determining who advances in the primaries that the big parties hold.
Absolutely, and the data shows that when states open up their primaries to either open or a semi-open primary, like what we're advocating for, they can see an increase in anywhere from 3 to 10% in voter participation in those primaries. So that's fairly significant and makes a big difference in participation.
And you say 39 other states already have done this. I mean, that's pretty remarkable. So this is not a new idea. It's somewhere that Maine kind of needs to get with the rest of the country, one could argue. in opening up these primaries.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What are some of the objections that you hear? Sometimes I'm sure there are people on the other side of this issue who don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, you know, one of the objections we hear, and I would say very few people that we've talked to are strongly opposed. Some just have questions they want to make sure that they have an understanding of. And one of the questions that we hear are, wouldn't this make it easier for a group of people to rig a primary election? So, for example, could a group of independent voters decide to pick the weakest Republican candidate that they would see as their weakest Republican? And history demonstrates, you know, in other states they have not seen that as an issue, and I think the fact that 39 other states are open demonstrates that. And I will say that's one of the reasons why we are advocating. Also, one of the reasons, recognizing that is a concern. That's one of the reasons why we are advocating for the primary where only unenrolled voters can vote in either the Democrat or the Republican. So if I'm a Democrat, I can't go in and vote in the Republican primary, and a Republican can't go in and vote in a Democratic primary. So it really, the structure of how we're proposing to set this up helps, I think, to alleviate some of those concerns.
Yeah, I think it probably does. And just so people know, I mean, you can't change your party affiliation in Maine willy-nilly. I mean, you can change it every 90 days, I believe it is. So if you, under the current structure, myself as an independent, I could go in if I wanted to vote in the Democratic Party and primary, and enroll that day. But then I couldn't unenroll that day. I would be
Correct.
a Democrat then for 3 months afterwards, or a Republican or whatever other party, that Libertarian, Green, you name it. So this would be a structure that would open it up more. So primaries can't be the primary election. So just we think about it, held in June, usually June 14th, right around there. Selecting party nominees for gubernatorial and presidential elections, and
legislative elections.
And legislative elections. Excuse me. How could I forget that? And what's it cost to do? I mean, this can't be free.
No. You know, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, and there hasn't been a fiscal note yet on this piece of legislation.
Or how are they paid for? I mean, if you look at, so we're holding an election in, here in Biddeford, we vote at Tiger Gym at Biddeford High School. So that's the case all over the state in hundreds of polling places. Who's paying for those party primaries?
That's a great question, and actually all taxpayers pay for it, and that is one of the most compelling reasons why folks support opening primaries to these independent voters, because independent voters are paying for a system that they are being prohibited from participating in, and a lot of folks understand that is unfair.
Yeah, and there are a lot of independents in Maine.
Yeah, so 35% of Maine voters are independent. So that's more than either Democrats or Republicans. So it's the largest voting bloc in the state.
Yeah.
And it's worth noting also, you know, we mentioned legislative races, but 70% of legislative districts are constructed in a way that those races are decided essentially by the primary.
Right.
So it's really important that as many voters as possible are able to participate in that.
That's a good point. I mean, you have districts, and everybody knows this. You know, you think, whoever wins the Republican primary is going to win that one, or whoever wins the Democratic primary is going to win that one. You know, the real election is the primary. You hear people say that. People in the know in politics will say that.
Yeah.
So at that point, it's especially, I see what you're saying, makes sense to me. You know, everyone, effectively, that is the overall election, you know, whether we like it or not. And this is a structure that's going to open that up to more voices.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And another thing to keep in mind is that a lot of new voters, millennials, 50% of millennials are unenrolled voters. And that's a cohort that, that everyone should be wanting to be bringing into the system and having participate more. So I think that's something important to remember as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I feel like this is going to come off, this discussion, as if I personally have no problem with political parties, right? I always joke, I don't have a problem with Republicans or Democrats. It's the two of them together right now that's the problem, right? So I think those are things that a lot of people, including me, feel like are impeding progress. We're too focused on, sort of the fight rather than the solutions. And I mean, you feel like going into something like this, if you had a contentious primary, the idea is probably they're centrist. A lot of independent voters tend to be, the more moderate, solution-oriented type. So we might get a little bit more of that voice in primaries coming out to vote.
Perhaps, and I know that is definitely a draw for some people who are supporting this effort. I would argue that independent voters, by definition, you can't guess which way any individual one is going to vote. Some people are independents because they are to the left of Main Street Democrats, and some are to the right of Republicans, and some truly are that moderate. So I think the real key is that regardless of why they're an independent, they should be able to participate.
It's like that old line, I don't want to be a part of any club that'll have me, or something like that, right? So it's not really about that so much as, look, everybody's paying for these primaries. We want to get as many people voting in primaries as we can. This is a straightforward electoral reform that we can undertake. It's not opening it up so that me, Marty, we can willy-nilly go vote on the same day in both the Democratic and Republican primaries. I need to choose one, but it gives me that opportunity to help select that person that would move on to the general election.
Yep, absolutely. And I think it's also important to note, again, that 80% of Maine voters support this. That was according to a poll done in 2017 by PPP, which is a well-respected polling firm. And I've looked at the split, and it is fairly even among Republican voters, Democrat voters, and independent voters that support this effort. So this is something that is coming from Maine people and Maine voters, and they want this. So we're just helping to shepherd it along and make it happen.
So this might seem like kind of a crass question, but why haven't we done it already?
That's a great question, and I think there has been, this is the first time we've really had a more organized campaign around it. So there has been, as I mentioned, legislation has been proposed before, but there have been few, what I would say, champions of the effort who were working to make sure that, I mean, the legislative process better than most people, but that were there every step of the way and applying that pressure to make sure it happens. And I think we've seen, last year in 2017 when it was introduced. So for folks watching at home, once legislation is introduced, it goes in front of a committee, and in this instance, it will go in front of the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee, and there's a public hearing, and then there's a workshop. Did I get everything right?
Yes, up on the 4th floor of the State House, open to anybody. Public hearings are always just that, public. You can listen online, but you can also show up, and you're encouraged to show up day of for this hearing or any other, and give your thoughts.
Exactly. And so there'd never before been a really concerted effort to make Maine voters even aware that this was happening. So that's part of why we're here today, to make sure that Maine voters know that this effort that they do support already is happening, and in fact let folks know how they can help. If you wanted to ask me that question, I'd be happy to tell people.
Yeah, I'll do that. I mean, what if somebody wants to get involved? I mean, what is a good way to contribute, and how can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a website, openprimariesmaine.com. And folks can go there and sign up to volunteer. There's various ways they can help. They can write a letter to the editor, to their local paper, explaining why they support this effort. They can show up and testify. We did have a hearing date, but it was postponed due to weather.
So snow day.
It's been one of those winters. We had a snow day, yeah. and it hasn't been rescheduled yet.
Yeah.
And we will be making that public on our website, yeah, when it is rescheduled. They can speak to their legislators. It's great for legislators to hear from folks who are out in their communities saying that this is something we support and please support it, and we want you to support it as well. That's something that's very helpful. Of course, as I already mentioned, Senator Justin Chenette here has been incredibly supportive and in fact, shown great leadership on this issue.
He's worked hard on a lot of electoral reforms that open up the process to everybody. Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
Exactly. So those are just some of the ways folks can help.
That's good. Take me through again, what do the naysayers say? I mean, who opposes this and why, do you think?
Yeah. So we talked about some people are afraid of kind of rigging the system. Yeah. And one of the other, concerns that we hear is from people who truly believe that you should be, they just truly believe that you should be enrolled in a party to be able to vote in that party primary. And while I certainly, respect that position, I would just say, since primary elections are paid for by all taxpayers, yeah. I would say that the club that they are talking about is in fact the electorate, our main voters, not the party itself, and we should all be able to participate in all of the elections.
So if this effort is successful, we're here in the spring, hopefully spring before too long, of 2019, and moves through the legislature. When would we see it work? In
the primaries of 2020.
Yeah.
That's coming up.
Yep.
Very quick.
And those are going to be big.
They are.
We're going to want to have as much voice in that, I would think, as we can. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there, on those, it's important wherever you come out on this issue or any other. Obviously, it's important to get out and vote, and that those primaries will be, like I said, June 12th or 14th or something like that of 2020. And I'm sure there'll be a bond issue or school budget vote or something at that same time. So if we can open up this process to everybody, so much the better. Well, that's good. I'm excited to be working on this. I'm passionate about all these kinds of things that make the voting process open to more people and make it easy for more people. So I appreciate you telling me about it. You want to just take us through one more time how, if somebody who's passionate about getting behind this effort, what they should do?
Absolutely. Thank you, Marty. And thank you for your support and early leadership on this as well.
Absolutely.
We really appreciate that. So if folks are interested in getting involved, they can visit us at www.openprimariesmaine.com. And there they can sign up to volunteer in a variety of ways, from writing a letter to the editor, to contacting your legislator, to opening up your home or a local coffee shop or brewery, to invite your neighbors and friends to come down and visit and hear more about it, to making a financial contribution. Of course, campaigns it does cost money to organize around this, and to signing up to endorse the effort as well. And that way we know that you're out there and that you're supporting, and we can let you know of other activities that are happening in your area. So that's how folks can help.
Well, that's good. Well, Kaitlin, thank you. So say your last name for me again.
LaCasse.
LaCasse. So how has this come to be?
My last name, LaCasse? Well, so, like so many Maine stories, my great-grandfather walked down from Quebec with his brothers, settled in Skowhegan, and somebody somewhere along the line changed it from LaCasse to LaCasse, and if it was good enough for my grandfather, it's certainly good enough for me.
No, absolutely. That's a great family tradition, and it's a wonderful. Obviously, we have a very proud Franco heritage here in Biddeford, and we I guess just this once for you, we can say LaCasse. So.
Thank you. You won't be surprised. No, you're not the only person to have given me a hard time about that. But
Yep. I think in Augusta and here in Bedford, we'd probably say LaCasse. But anyway, all right. Well, it's great to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be keeping viewers up to date on this. We're going to keep working on it. Hopefully, we'll be hearing good news as we move through the legislative process here through the spring. So, Kaitlin, thanks again for coming down to Bedford to tell us about this.
Thank you, Marty. I really appreciate it.
Yep. Good. Well, thank you, Steve and Steve. You guys do a great job with Bedford Public Access, and I expect some very good editing.